Island. Okay, and so maybe why don't we start? Why don't we start in India and ask Anu to kind of give her both her perceptions of common security and how it would apply. Be obviously helpful to get a sense of what people are thinking in relationship to the war in Ukraine, but also angles in terms of Asia, especially in relationship to China. So Anu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and making me part of all of you. And I've been active with the whole peace issue for many years, and now I'm retired as a professor from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, where I've become adjunct professor in another university. And I work with the Asia-Europe People's Forum and their Peace and Security Working Group. So, firstly, we were just talking with Reiner before you all joined, and he was asking me about India's perspective on what's happening in Ukraine. And I said, as usual, there are, of course, two perspectives. One from the state, the official perspective, and the other from civil society. Now, civil society, of course, has called for immediate end to the war and a return to diplomacy. But sadly, even though I also signed some of the statements which came from the Coalition of Nuclear Disarmament, etc., they didn't mention the need for common security. So it was just, let's immediate have peace, etc. And I was hoping, because I saw some of the other resolutions from peace groups, and they did mention that the whole issue of common security should be on the table also. As far as the official perspective is concerned from the state, number one, India's very deep relations with Russia, even though now there are building strategic ties with the United States. And India's dependence on Russian arms and military equipment, and Russia's support to India continuously whenever India's had some issue with either Pakistan and its unresolved conflicts with China, etc. Russia has acted and put pressure on China. So India, as well as Indian civil society, is quite cautious that they do not really want to criticize Russian action. They would prefer, civil society would prefer to just criticize American imperialism. And they're quite sore about the war in Iraq and Libya and the positions in Israel and Palestine. Whereas they have not been that active about Russia and its position in Crimea and Abkhazia, Georgia, etc. So their position is quite muted. But overall, this is a position. And the Indian state has not criticized Russia. They have just called for de-escalation, diplomacy, a return to the table. And when asked specifically, and the Ukrainian ambassador also asked our prime minister, and he refused to say anything against the Russians. So that's where we are on Ukraine. However, on common security, now India is a typical national security state. And common security is not very popular a concept in the stronger states. And so if we want to advance the idea of common security, I believe that in Asia, number one, we should speak to the smaller states. And that is how, and why I raise that is because earlier treaties, like the treaties on nuclear weapons, on giving up nuclear weapons, TPNW, etc., the smaller states were prone to sign them. So around South Asia, for example, you leave out India and Pakistan, but if you address it to the parliamentarians in Bhutan, Nepal, even Sri Lanka, in Southeast Asia, if you move to Philippines, even Malaysia, to the Pacific Islands, they would accept something like common security. So that is one kind of tactic, I believe, which would be useful for advancing the idea of common security. And this document, which you all are writing, I think Reiner is involved in that. It would be good to translate it into some specific local, the smaller local languages, and popularize that. All those smaller countries are heavily influenced by non-governmental organizations. They are the ones who suffer most when there are conflicts. They are very worried in Asia about China's influence, even though states are taking advantage of China. And every time there's any kind of dispute, people turn to China also. So they are balancing with China, and so that's one area where the whole idea of common security can become part of the narrative. Secondly, the regional organizations like ASEAN, there is the SAARC, SAFTA, etc., which often talk about the need for some form of collective security, but what prevents them from moving ahead are essentially bilateral territorial conflicts. So when you speak of common security, some section of it has to address, because there is no common understanding of these territorial conflicts. So, so that needs to come in. How does one resolve border conflicts with common security? Because that is where realists and others overtake peace activists' narratives on security. The third issue on insecurities in Asia is primarily around, a lot of them are internal conflicts, their own secession movements, whether it's Mindanao in the Philippines, it is the tribal areas and Baluchistan in Pakistan, it is Kashmir and the Northeast India in India, the Chittagong Hill tracts. They're like almost, if you count, about 60 live internal conflicts. So the interstate conflicts have declined, and for many areas it's possible to talk about common security, but they are riddled with internal conflicts. And I think common security will have to look into that. Of course, there are things like human security, etc., to resolve internal conflicts, but state power and the degeneration of all the regimes in Asia, which have become more right-wing, they're intolerant of dissent, there's a lot of crony capitalism. So it's not going to be easy, but nonetheless, it is an attractive concept if we tell regimes that you will survive longer and you can stay in power longer if there's social cohesion internally and common security externally. So I think that's all, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was really very, very good, and perspectives that I think most of us haven't heard. So that was very, very appreciative for that. Steve, before going to Reiner, Steve, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Steve Gallant, Cambridge. I work with Joseph's group, CPDCS, and also Mass Peace Action. Long time anti-war, Vietnam War person, et cetera, and follow on.
Reiner, the floor is yours. I'll let you introduce yourself briefly. You're muted.
Yeah, I see it. So my name is Reiner Braun. I'm the executive director of the International Peace Bureau, and I'm, how do I say this, one of the leading figures of the German peace movement. I engaged in many campaigns and actions. I think you expect from me that I'm saying something to Ukraine and the development of Ukraine and what's happened in Germany and the surroundings. And maybe at the end, I will come with some sentences also to common security. You know, since 48 hours, we are all really under pressure. The last night, the most of us slept very short. We had the first protest action of the German peace movement yesterday. We will have a big rally on Sunday, and we have an action conference of the German peace movement on Saturday, where we have more than 300 people registered up to now in a very short time. So the German peace movement is on the street, and we definitely have one common position. This has three parts. First part, we condemn the aggression of Russia. This is not acceptable to make an illegal war against a neighbor country. Whatever happened before, I will come to this. Second point, the alternative is not a further militarization of the European Union, the development of NATO, and further more military budget or higher military budget. The alternative is cooperation, dialogue, and common security. And the interesting point is that in quite all the documents of the German peace organizations, IPPNW, Peace Action, Cooperation for Peace, whatever, we have the mentioning of common security as the alternative to confrontation and war. This unites the German peace movement, even when we definitely have different opinions to Putin and to the Russian politics. But you know, we are quite united in our activities and totally united in the no to this war. But you know, what does this mean, this war? First of all, I think it means the end of the European security structure, which was developed at the end of the Cold War period and has a positive highlight with the Paris Charter and the development of the OSCE in the beginning of the 90s, and which was step to step destroyed by the NATO enlargement to the east. The NATO expansion to the east against the spirit of the Paris Charter and against many agreements between Bush and Gorbachev, Baker and Genscher, and destroyed more or less this European Charter, and now it comes to the end. We have a new document from last Sunday, which a US professor found in the British archive, British Foreign Ministry archive, which underlined that the directors of the foreign ministries of Germany, France, Great Britain, and the US, meeting in March 1991, said no troops, no NATO behind the Elbe, the river in Germany. I have not to tell you what they have done. We have at 1919, we had 60 member states of NATO, now we have 30, and all the East European countries become mainly also under the pressure of the United States member of the NATO. These NATO expansion, and to take no concerns about Russian security interests, is the background of this horrible war and the horrible crisis we are facing now. And people were speaking about Putin. And I think we have to. But you know, we also have to see the development of the president of Russia in relation to the international politics and the aggression of NATO. He was speaking in the German parliament in 2001, getting standing ovations for offering cooperation and say Germany is the key country which helped us, Russia, by modernizing our countries, bringing our country to the 21st century. Then we had the NATO enlargement and the NATO expansion with all the protests of Russia. No one was taking care about it. When Putin was protesting, they were laughing. May Clinton sent him a new bottle of vodka, but nothing else. And for Russia, then we had the speech in Munich, 2007, where Putin said, we have red lines. We have interest and don't go further. And they were doing it. Then we had the internal war organized by the president of Saakashvili, the president of Georgia in 2008 and 9, which shows Russia will stop you. And now we are at we had the very clear try to engage Ukraine into the NATO, officially or not officially, but absolutely military. With military behavior, with military exercises, with US officers and troops and stuff in Ukraine. You know, we had a lot of US officers during the last months in the Ukraine. US were sending munitions and weapons for $2.5 billion during the last 3 years to Ukraine. And I can add now what France and Great Britain and the others were sending. So taking no care, and don't take in account that we have to see also the Russian security interest is one of the background of the war. This does never excuse the war, but I think for us it is also needed to understand the political situation and what consequences this political situation has. And let me say one word to the Ukraine. For you, maybe it is really far away. For us, it's around the corner. Ukraine is a highly interesting country because of 3 reasons. The first reason, it is a country between Europe and Asia. It is something, it could be a bridge between Europe and Asia. It could help develop relations between Europe and Asia. And the control about these Eurasian country, which is a binding stone between both, is from highest interest for the Western countries and also for Russia. Second, there are historical and many relations of Russia to Ukraine. I'm speaking about Putin and his speech a little bit later. But we have to have in mind that a key point to weaken Russia is to have the control about Ukraine. I think all of you read Brzezinski, and he wrote it very clear. Having the control over Ukraine makes Russia to a regional power. That is the reason it is so. The fight about Ukraine is more than a fight about one country. It's a fight of a central role that Russia could play and want to play in the world. The third point is Ukraine itself is a deeply divided country. It is deeply divided in traditional Russian-oriented parts in Ukraine, which is more or less the east and the south, and the more coming from the Habsburg Empire, the western part of Ukraine. And up to now, never was really united Ukraine. You can see this by how the people were voting. You can see this by the protest actions and an end. So when you want to rule the Ukraine, you always have to take care of both sides. And with 1914 and the putsch, people were only taking care on one side and were condemning the other side. Don't allow the Russian speech, don't make it as a second language, take away all the Russian documents. Russia was not any longer a speech in the offices and an end. There are a lot of points where really were undemocratic pressure on the more Russian part of the society, which is always also the most industrial part of the society. And also have in mind that Ukraine changed on the landscape. The Ukraine of 1917 in the First World War under German dominance was much more to the east. The Ukraine in the beginning of the 20s, before it becomes the Soviet Union Republic, was also much more to the east. With Yalta and Potsdam, Ukraine developed to the west, take over some parts of the traditional Polish and take over some traditional parts of the East European countries. So it is also very difficult to develop these countries as a state. This makes the situation so difficult. But saying this, I have deeply to say no to Putin's speech when he accepted the two Republicans. I think you saw these pictures when he was sitting in this Katharine room and was speaking, and where he developed a chauvinistic Ukrainian perspective, chauvinistic Russian perspective to Ukraine. And I think this is also one background of his thinking changing from 2001 to today. And this nationalistic, chauvinistic speech is something like the preparation of the war. So this is a little bit the difficulties of the Ukraine, the difficulties of the actual situation. And I want to say NATO expansion is a key point. Let me say at the end 2 points. First of all, peace movement. I'm very proud of the German and the international peace movement. I'm very proud of the Russian young people which were demonstrating yesterday in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and in 40 cities of the country. The same like the small pacifist actions which were happened in some cities of Ukraine. These people are really courageous, going on the street and fighting for peace. And we should do everything to support them. And IPB sent yesterday to the demonstration protest actions in Moscow and St. Petersburg a solidarity resolution, and I can only ask you to do the same. We have to fight with them together. That is a key point for me, to have common actions with these people which are protesting against the war in Russia. To common security. When we are thinking now how we can overcome the war in Ukraine and what could be the next steps, Anu mentioned the key point. The first step is ceasefire. There will be no development without a ceasefire. Second, definitely must be the reduce of the Russian troops home to their hometowns and leave Ukraine. But what does this mean, common security system for Ukraine? What does this mean for Europe? I think the only possibility for having united and developed Ukraine, and Ukraine is today the poorest country in Europe. It is poorer than Moldavia. So to develop these countries, I think we need a neutral Ukraine as something between the two sides, Europe and Asia, NATO and Russia, with deep connections to both sides, with industrial connections to Russia, with agricultural connections to the West, with an exchange. This old idea of a neutral Ukraine, maybe following the example of Austria, should be part of our discussion when we are thinking about how we can solve the problem in a peaceful way. For Europe, I think it will take a longer time of trust building and cooperation that we can come again to a new European security system. In 2025, we are 50 years after the OSCE conference of Helsinki, and maybe this is a good date for a new European security architecture and the big meeting of the presidents and the civil society in Helsinki. We need dialogues, we need discussion, we need phone calls, we need first steps to common activities. We need an exchange of people, so we have to revitalize the idea of people's diplomacy activities. That is the only way I can see that we can come out of these horrible crises and this war. And these are only some impressions. I can say much more about the situation, but maybe these are some thoughts in the beginning. I'm very open. Hopefully I can to answer your questions and to react to your comments. Thank you for getting up so early, for joining such a meeting. We are always happy to spread our information with the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Reiner, and your talk certainly made it more than worthwhile to get up early. So thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor at this juncture, and we're a small enough group that you maybe just if you've got questions, just sort of speak out and raise them rather than going through a chair. I think we're okay to do that, and please don't be shy.
Reiner, you said there were 3 points that unified the peace movement in Germany, and I think you mentioned the third, but I lost it. I know the first was no to the
No to war, The second was common security, and the third is more an internal point. No bigger military budget in Germany.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You know, because the German government immediately comes with new stupid ideas to have a big enlargement of the military budget.
Right. Okay.
You're all spellbound. Terry, Paul,
I'm particularly interested in how we can build stronger liaisons between U.S. peace movement and true people's peace movement in the midst of this crisis. So I'm hoping for more specific information, and I am very heartened, Reiner, from hearing you describe the courageous protests that people have already made in Ukraine and within Russia.
Terry, just to say that some on this call will remember Oleg Bodrov, who we toured just before the pandemic in St. Petersburg. And last night he sent to Reiner and to me the translation of a petition,
Wonderful.
basically calling for condemning the invasion, also calling for the war criminals should be held accountable. What was remarkable about it was it had 300,000 signatures in 12 hours. With any luck, we'll be sending that out to our entire list in the course of the morning.
Wonderful. Thank you.
My immediate concern is what happens over the next week or two in terms of NATO's response to this. Do either of you see NATO taking some type of military action over either no-fly zones or something like this? Is there any likelihood that Congress will push Biden into a military confrontation on it? How do you read the situation? Will the U.S. really just stay with sanctions? Or is something else going on behind the scenes that is going to kind of have the next shoe drop? And how will we react to that? If there are calls in Germany for increasing the military budget, there are certainly going to be calls in the U.S. for that. This is a total gift to the war makers in the U.S. And so this is going to be an onslaught that we're going to be facing. And I think we just have to be ready for it, because I don't think we've begun to see it yet. Clearly, the whole American press is united behind going after Russia, and every other issue is off the table right now.
Reiner, what do you think? What are your fears or concerns in terms of NATO response?
I think we can say that we have again an iron curtain. We have the iron curtain of the Russian border, but NATO accepts this iron curtain. That is very clear. There is no discussion about any engagement of NATO countries in Ukraine. This is red line. They will not do it. But what they are doing is they are militarizing their countries. They are raising the military budget. They put non-NATO troops to the border. Today, they put 5 new F-16 to Romania. We will have no military base of NATO in Romania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Estonia, and the whole border, Poland. There could be even a discussion about new nuclear weapons in Poland. We have the discussion about enlarging the so-called missile defense system in Romania and Poland to even a more aggressive military system, because the rockets you can immediately change to the Tomahawks, and then you can use them for aggressive activities. So we will have much more influence of the military power, militaries in the different countries, so politics, and we will have a raising of all military budgets in all NATO countries. That is for me absolutely clear. For me, it's clear that they will not invade to Russia and to Ukraine because they will lose it. they have no chance to do it. So but the situation is very difficult because you never know what's happened without any control, what's happened between the different events, what's happened in Chernobyl at the end. The Russians said Chernobyl is now under Russian control. Do you know this? You never know who is makes which technical mistake, or what's happened when the US or the Russians shoot down a US aircraft or vice versa. So there is really a big, big danger of enlarging the whole conflict. And this can be mainly happened without that both sides want to do it. So this is definitely absolutely dangerous. And the third point is, you know, we all, I think Joseph and me, we are two parts of that. We all were fighting that to develop friendly relations to Russia, cooperative relations to Russia, working with each other. And now we have a horrible, brutal enemy structure. And this kills all our work from the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years to come to quite normal discussing, also friendly relations to Russia. And this is really a throwback to the Cold War period. And this makes it, for me, so horrible because, you know, it is absolutely opposite of what we have done all the last years. You know, we are not Putin's friends, but we want to have relations, common relations, friendly relations to Russia for common work, for controversial discussions. And I think with Oleg and Alexei Gromyko, IPB was a good example how to organize these discussions. But now we have this hateful spirit in the public, which make it very difficult to fight for friendly relations to Russia. So this is really a big step back for me. And we have to think how we can come again to a discussion and to more openness in these relations. This is for me, a very important point because it destroys our work from the last years.
Thank you, Ryan. It's all very, very helpful. I want to throw a question to Anu.
Yeah, sure.
Thinking here, you know, on the one hand, as you were saying earlier, it seems that China has been acting better at this stage, at least with its public statements, than India. But I'd like it if you could talk a little bit about India-Chinese relations and what you think might be done. You know, what approach the movement here in the United States might have toward building more helpful common security relations in Asia. I mean, you talked earlier about engaging with the smaller nations, and I think that's a very, very helpful idea. But I'd like more of your thinking in terms of what might be done in relationship to China, and maybe you might also just say a little bit, because I think most people don't know about just the internal repression of the Modi government.
Yeah, well, interestingly, if you saw the Chinese statement, they also use the word common security, that there is a need for common security. And I thought one should, you know, use that as a rhetorical trap, that if you're talking of common security for this war between Russia and Ukraine and with NATO, maybe you should also use common security for the region. That's one. Second, about India itself. So, you know, India currently is under this heavily right-wing nationalist, ethnic nationalist, oppressive regime, which does not tolerate dissent. All the indexes on democracy brought out, whether by the Economist Intelligence Report or the World Democracy Index or the Governance Index, the Fragile State Index, all of them, and correctly, they call India now a flawed democracy, an ethnic nationalism, a majoritarian country, and democracy here has been hollowed out. Civil society is under terrific strain because all funding has, not only that, funding has stopped. They've taken away all the bank licenses for receiving any kind of international funding for civil society. So there's a slew of measures. In addition to that, is that activists have been jailed, whether they are climate activists, peace activists, land rights, social justice, etc. So there is this kind of system, but we will continue to have elections, and it depends on the people if they throw out this government. Third, about China. This border dispute between India and China is so deep, and there is such a difference of perspectives. India recognizes the colonial borders of India. You know, there's a huge border between India and China, whereas China does not. And it looks into, like Putin did about Ukraine, you know, the Kievan Empire, which Reiner saw, that horrific speech of Putin. China has a similar position on its borders. It talks about the Middle Kingdom and how Tibet and what is Arunachal Pradesh in India always belonged to it since the Middle Kingdom. So there's not even any possibility of dialogue because they cannot accept, they have not even made a map. And there's no, even though there's a line of so-called line of actual control, there are always violations on it every year, and that helps this nationalist government, our nationalist government, to have this China phobia, increase militarization. The Indian defense budgets is going into billions in a country with the world's largest number of poor, without a health system, with the largest illiteracy, with inequality between genders. This is a macho, militarist, misogynist. I mean, it's this government. And China also uses this nationalism about a greater China. Xi Jinping uses it in his meetings in the CPC. So this kind of rhetoric continues. There's an India phobia there and a China phobia here, which goes from the state into society. The only people are this very small and fragmented civil society, which talks of some amount of peace. And the peace activists are seen as anti-national because they're talking of peace and they're talking about reduced budgets, etc. So they're under terrific pressure. And then on top of it, Pakistan and China have this great alliance. So some of the territory which Pakistan had walked into, which India sees as its own, but India and Pakistan ultimately were like Ukraine and Russia. They were one country, divided at the time of independence because of British colonialism and their divide and rule kind of politics. So Pakistan has given part of this territory to China, and they're making the Belt and Road over here, the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is going through what India considers its own territory. So there is high tension amongst these three nuclear powers, with Pakistan and China on one side and India on the other. And this is where this international geopolitics also comes in, because all these years, Pakistan was very useful for the Americans because of West Asia and Afghanistan, and they have close ties with Pakistan. And so India saw that very negatively until now, where India is building its own independent relations with the United States, buying more arms from them, opening up trade channels, and so on and so forth. So India is balancing between Russia and the United States. Pakistan is also making moves towards Russia. When Ukraine happened, Imran Khan was in Moscow.
Right.
Catch your breath.
So, yeah. So that is really the situation. And I don't see any improvement happening with these very ultra-nationalist regimes. So the situation between India and China is bleak, and it's actually pushing India along with Russia or with the United States. Thanks.
Thank you. I know just to say that within the nuclear disarmament movement here, I think there's been a sense of not being able to get any traction, to be able to do anything meaningful in relationship to the nuclear arms races in especially in South Asia, and recognition that that human survival depends on what happens there. So just given who's on this call, I'm glad that people heard that, and we have to build in that way. Other questions, Paul again?
I know I have a question for you. I'm wondering how you read China reacting to these recent developments, the invasion and the fallout. Because China knows that really it is the main focus of what Biden and the US would like to focus on, not Russia. In terms of the future, in terms of military developments, political, economic developments. So given that situation, that China knows that it is really, for all of its aggression and criminal activity, that it knows that it is really in the bullseye for the US. And so I'm just wondering how you think it's going to negotiate this new world that we are now in, waiting to see how it develops. Will it eventually come to support Russia on this? Will it oppose Russia on this and try to take on the US by itself? How do you see these developments playing out in terms of how China looks at its confrontation with the United States?
Yeah, well, China so far has been focusing on becoming, using its financial, technological, and increasing its financial and economic strengths vis-a-vis the United States and all other powers. Whereas Russia, that is the contrast between them. Russia focuses on security and militarism, whereas China is focusing on the financial angles of having strength through finance and their banks and their hold on technology and moving ahead on that. And China and Russia have a perfect alliance on that. Now, if you see what happened a few months earlier on the issue of Hong Kong and Taiwan and the American armadas and the AUKUS treaty, which China saw this was clearly against them, US, Australia, UK trilateral treaty which happened just before. There was a fear in Asia that China would react, and they did react. But Russia at that time sobered China. They kind of drew them back, even on the question of Hong Kong, because they were asked that, would you back China in case China kind of moves forward with some kind of attack on the 7th Fleet, which they said was coming into their waters. And Russia said they would not be interested in getting dragged into any kind of naval conflict in the Indo-Pacific. So while the two are great strategic partners, I don't think they want to back each other in aggressive wars. They have their own contradictions also. China's spread into Central Asia, Russia's great reliance on China, and now with the oil embargoes which are going to happen, almost all of Russian oil is going to come into Asia, and China is the route. They've already got
the US? Yeah,
Beg your
and to
pardon?
the US,
Yeah,
this is excluded from the embargo. This is really double standards.
it's double standard.
Yes, the US is importing the third biggest amount of oil from Russia till today, after Mexico and Canada, before Saudi Arabia. Exactly in the year 2020, 27 million tons of poor oil. It enlarged from 2014 to 2020, when everyone was crying for sanctions, about 63%. That is double standards. That is the actual politics of Biden.
Absolutely, because
Let's
Nord
kill the
Stream,
Europeans. Let the Europeans suffer. We take it.
Reiner, let Anu finish.
I completely agree, because Nord Stream, which was about to be commissioned, that has been stalled. Nord Stream between Germany and Russia, and billions of dollars went into it. And it's appalling that that's been stalled. And whereas Russia can export oil to the US. And the other thing is the US is offering fracked oil to Europe, which is 3 times the price of Russian oil. And just a few days before this Ukraine thing started, Putin had a very good meeting with the German chancellor and offered Russian oil at highly subsidized rates. And immediately after that, this whole talk of, NATO, Ukraine being independent, and so they can join NATO and their application is being considered, came onto the table. Wow. So that set off a whole spiral of fears in this entire region. The oil producing countries, OPEC and all, met, and they felt that they could not supply the same amount of oil which Russia was supplying to Europe. So oil prices went through the roof, including in all the poor countries of Asia. Everyone is feeling it. Grain prices, oil prices, and everything.
Anu, just to follow up quickly, you said that a lot of Russian oil will now go to China.
Russia has a direct pipeline now with China, and China is hungry for oil, but they will be able to put pressure on Russia to lower the prices of oil. So China is a very hard paw. And Russia knows that it's no great friend of China, and that is why Russia was making overtures to Trump. They were willing, for this earlier kind of American position that let them encircle China, but let there be some kind of bilateralism or peace with Russia. They were willing for that for all these years. I think for 20 years, they have been trying for that, but they have been spurned. And therefore now they see no alternative but to get closer to China. But at the same time, they leverage their relations with China. Otherwise, they wouldn't have these kind of close relations with India and Egypt and Indonesia, etc. But all these countries have been forced into this position because the United States position also keeps shifting. So that's the situation.
Thank you.
I saw Reiner wanted to jump in here, and then as we approach the hour, after just to give Anu and Reiner kind of the last shots in terms of what they think we need to know. Reiner, go ahead.
In my final words, I really would like to say something how the conflicts Anu mentioned and the Ukraine conference are deeply connected. For me, they are part of the fight of a new world order between the rising countries and the countries which are becoming weaker. And Ukraine is in this middle point, but this is for my final words. Let me say some words to the Russian-Chinese relation, because for us, this is a key point, because this also affects Russian-German relations. First of all, Russia has 2 oil and 2 gas pipelines from Russia to China. And they are selling oil and gas to Russia, to China under the world market prices. This is what Anu was mentioning. So Russia is earning money, but it could earn much more money by better conditions. Because this is the background of China to have very long-term contracts, and these contracts were made in the situation when the gas and oil prices were much lower than they are now. Russia and China has, for me, something like a strategic partnership in many cases. Above all, and with these sanctions, it will be even deeper. China is giving and selling to Russia all the technical facilities they will not get in the West and in the US. And Russia will sell them all fossil resources. This destroyed environment, this develop more pollution, and. But this will happen. The open question for me, and Russia and China has not done it up to now, they don't have a military alliance. They have a military partnership. They have an exchange of exercises, but they don't have a military alliance. And the Russians avoid to have it. And the reason is very simple. And I will explain it by a personal view. When you are going to the river Amur, this broad river between Russia and China, and staying at a river bridge and look to the left side, to the north, then you see small farmers' houses, reach big landscape, woods, and nothing else, empty. When you are looking to the south, you are seeing high crackers, big streets, modern industry, and 100,000 of cars, highest modern technologies. This is the difference between Russia and China. And Russia has a deep concern that the millions of Chinese people, the power of China, will go to Siberia. So they really, and I'm absolutely near to, with Anu, Russia tried to diverse their foreign politics to so many partners as possible, also in Asia, not to rely on China alone. That is what definitely Putin or Lavrov and whoever has responsibility in their foreign politics really never wants to do. So that is a little bit the development of these reasons. Now, with the Western sanctions, we put Russia in stronger and deeper coalitions with China. And frankly speaking, I don't think that this is a long-term interest of all of us. So that is for me, and the alternative, Anu mentioned this, is common security. The only alternative for all of that we described is common security that we developed again in Europe. And Europe has a history of common security with the KSZE, the OSCE, the Helsinki process, that we are coming back to that. And let me say one word to the new Olaf Palme report on common security, because I think this is important to know. You know that the International Peace Bureau, IPB, ITUC, the International Trade Unions Confederation, and the Olaf Palme Center in Stockholm is working on a new report. It will come out on the 21st of April to the 40 years anniversary of the first Olaf Palme report. We will rely on many things of the old report, but what is new? We will approach two very key points. One is, when I summarize it, the globalization of common security. We need common security for solving the global problems of the world, above all the climate problem. No one can imagine that we can solve the climate problem in wars or in confrontation. It is only solvable, even when it's very difficult, in cooperation. And this means we need a structure of cooperation. We need common security as the background of the politics. So the globalization of the common security approach is one point. And the next point is what Anu was mentioning by describing the conflicts, is the regionalization of common security. We need common security development for many, many other parts of the world. You know, Palme developed it for Europe, or the Palme Commission, well, not only Palme, but we now need such common security developments for South China Sea, Indian-Pakistan, Indian-China relations, Korea and Pennsylvania, Central Africa, with all the conflicts of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and. So we need more common security development for the different region. And we will give some first ideas for that, some approaches and some suggestions to that. That is key point of the new Olaf Palme report. And I really would like to ask you and to organize, and also Anu, please organize a presentation of this Olaf Palme report in your country. We as the organizers and all the commissioners, we had about 25 or 26 experts from all over the world, including China, Russia, and other parts of the world, including also Africa, which were working on it. We are always willing to present the reports in different webinars and other activities. So please, directly after we present these the new Olaf Palme report in Stockholm on the 21st of April, please start organizing specific events in the different countries that we can spread the information about this report.
Reiner, just to say, obviously, we're in the best position to be doing that here in the United States, and let's have conversations offline about what that might look like. Anu, you get the last word.
Just to say that I agree with Reiner on everything he said, but there's one issue what he raised, that at the moment there's no military alliance between Russia and China. So there's still scope for common security, and for NATO to stop that alliance, they need to again extend a hand of some kind of cooperation for especially Europe and NATO with Russia to stop this military alliance, which will be disastrous. It will be too strong.
Yeah.
No power in the world would be able to compete with what is happening in Russia technologically or with China financially. So it's best to stop it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was the first time we've tried doing a briefing with members of our advisory committee, and I think it was excellent, and should whet our appetite for building on that, and also just I guess in closing, just to appreciate how privileged I've been to work with each of you, and to thank you for your contributions. It will. In the beginning, we went around in terms of talking about different organizations that we're a part of, and so in addition to the impact of your words with our campaign, I expect it'll also resonate out to other groups and forces. So thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Be well, and members of our board, we'll see you before too long with our next board meeting. Have a good
Thank
day.
Have a nice
Good evening.
Thank you.
I know. Get a good night's sleep.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye.
Bye.